My name is Leo Maxwell, and for the last couple of months, life has felt like a twisted fairy tale. I'm 16, and I'm stuck in a house with my dad and his new, ever so charming family, a family I'm starting to suspect is actively plotting my demise. It all started with Bethany, my dad's girlfriend of 3 years. Bethany! Even the name leaves a metallic taste in my mouth. From day one, she's had it out for me. When Dad's around, she's all sugar and smiles, calling me sweetheart and asking about my day with this nauseatingly sweet tone. The second he's out of the room, the mask slips. Her eyes narrow, the smile vanishes, and I become a cockroach she's desperate to squash. She has 2 kids, both paragons of virtue, naturally. Chad, the 18-year-old golden boy, and Sierra, the 15-year-old queen bee. They're Bethany's little attack dogs, echoing her subtle jabs and blatant snubs. It's a 3-pronged assault, a constant barrage of negativity aimed directly at me. I guess maybe they're jealous. My dad, Ethan, is actually related to me. I'm his flesh and blood. They see me as a threat to their little nuclear family fantasy, which is ironic because I'm the one feeling threatened. Ever since Ethan met Bethany, he's become completely blind to her true nature. According to him, she's perfect, a saint, the missing piece he's been searching for his whole life. According to me, she's a viper disguised as a PTA mom. I've tried, believe me. I've tried to tell Ethan about Bethany's two-faced act, but he dismisses it as teenage angst, a misguided attempt to sabotage his happiness because I can't accept that he's moved on from Mom. Okay, maybe there's a sliver of truth in that. My parents were complicated. They were married, technically, until Mom passed away, but they lived separate lives. Legal separation, I think it was called. They stayed married for me, they said, so I could have a normal childhood. Looking back, it was anything but. They realized they'd fallen out of love when I was around 7. Divorce was considered, but the financial and emotional fallout felt too daunting. So they opted for separate wings of the house, separate lives, separate bedrooms. They were roommates, co-parents, but not husband and wife. As a kid, it didn't make sense. I wanted them to be like other parents, holding hands, sharing kisses, sitting together on the couch to watch TV. I was happiest when we had dinner together, the 3 of us, a unit. I'd sabotage their dates, throw little tantrums, anything to bring them back together. It was a childish fantasy, fueled by cartoons and Disney movies, but it was my reality. Bethany was the first person who seemed unfazed by my pathetic attempts to manipulate the situation. I was 13, a bundle of teenage rage and resentment. I was cold, rude, deliberately obnoxious, but she didn't flinch. She met my hostility with an unsettling calmness. I kept waiting for her to crack, to expose her annoyance, but she just kept smiling, a smile that felt more like a threat than an invitation. Eventually, around 13 or so, I started to accept the reality of my parents' situation. They were happy, or at least content, with their arrangement. I stopped acting out, stopped trying to force them back together. Both of my parents were relieved, I think. But Bethany, I suspect, never forgot. She saw me as a potential enemy, a threat to her future happiness. Her husband had died years ago, and she and her kids seemed to genuinely like Ethan. They saw him as their ticket to a better life. About a year into their relationship, Ethan sat me and Mom down. He wanted to move out, rent an apartment with Bethany and her kids. He wanted to get to know them better, he said, because he was serious about her, wanted to marry her eventually. I was numb. I didn't know how to feel. Mom, however, was furious. She reminded him of their agreement, the promise they made to stay together, in the same house, until I was 18. She respected Bethany, she said, and she understood his feelings, but a promise was a promise. They argued for weeks, a silent war fought in hushed tones behind closed doors. But Mom held her ground, and Ethan eventually caved. After that, Bethany's resentment towards us, towards Mom and me, only intensified. Then, last year, Mom's health took a nosedive. Heart problems, the doctor said, in and out of the hospital for weeks. Then, a brief respite, a false sense of security. And then, one morning, she was gone. A heart attack, sudden and brutal. Ethan and I were devastated. I think I took it the hardest. For a month, it was just us, father and daughter, united in grief. Ethan tried his best, but he was clearly lost, adrift in a sea of sorrow. And then, a month after Mom's death, he dropped the bomb. Bethany and her kids were moving in. They were getting married, he announced in a small ceremony. Just family and close friends, in a couple of weeks. He was rushing things, he admitted, but he'd waited long enough. His marriage with Mom had dissolved due to her passing, and he felt he owed it to Bethany to finally fulfill his promises. Besides, he said, I was old enough to handle it now. Having my new family around would cheer me up, help me cope with my grief. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that having them around would only make things worse. But I saw the hopeful glint in his eyes, the desperate need for happiness. I knew he'd been waiting for this for years, that Bethany was his chance at a new life. So I bit my tongue and played the dutiful daughter. It felt insensitive, getting married so soon after Mom's death. Regardless of their unusual arrangement, they were still family. He should have waited, at least a little while, but I put on a happy face, plastered a smile on my face, and tried to be supportive. After Bethany and her brood moved in, the only real change for me was that I spent less time in the living room. I couldn't stand being around her. I was keeping the peace for Ethan's sake, but I wanted nothing to do with her. And the feeling I suspected was mutual. Her kids ignored me. She ignored me. We pretended to be a happy, blended family when Ethan was around, when we sat down for dinner. But that was it. It was a carefully constructed facade, masking the simmering tension beneath the surface. Then, about a week ago, Mom's lawyer contacted us. Her will, apparently finalized recently, when her heart problems resurfaced, left everything to me. The majority of her assets, that is. Everyone else received smaller, equal shares of her money. Turns out, my seemingly ordinary mother was hiding a secret. She owned a vast portfolio of properties, inherited from her late uncle a few years prior. She'd never told anyone about it, kept it a secret, and left it all to me. Both Ethan and I were stunned. I was happy not because of the properties themselves, but because I had something that was entirely mine, something to secure my future. And, of course, there was a substantial amount of money involved. The list of properties my uncle had left her was extensive, and I would decide what to do with it all when I turned 18. Until then, Ethan would act as the estate's guardian. He seemed surprised, almost offended, that he'd only been assigned as guardian. He hadn't known about any of these properties. I suppose it shouldn't have mattered. Mom had separated her finances when they legally separated. But emotionally, I think he was shaken. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, absorbing the information. But there was a definite, palpable shift in everyone's behavior towards me after that day. Chad and Sierra continued to ignore me, but Ethan joined the club. He became cold, distant, almost resentful. Bethany, however, was the most unsettling. She already hated me, never bothered to hide it when Ethan wasn't around. But now, the pretense was gone. She was openly nasty, treated me like I was a piece of dirt she'd tracked in on her shoe. Snide comments, pointed glares, the whole package. It wasn't anything new, but the fact that Ethan didn't seem to notice or care really bothered me. It was like he was giving her permission. Yesterday, the dam finally broke. Ethan was working late, and Chad and Sierra were out with their friends. I didn't want to be alone in the house with Bethany, so I made plans with a couple of friends and was about to leave when she started yelling at me about the dishes. Apparently, she wasn't the hired help, wasn't going to wash my dishes. I tried to stay calm. I told her I'd wash them when I got home, but she insisted they were my chores. that I had to do them right then and there. There's a house rule: everyone washes their own dishes, and I was going to do them as soon as I got back. But she started yelling so loudly that I lost it too. It escalated quickly. Curses were exchanged, insults were hurled, and then she dropped the bomb. She knew, she said, why I was tolerating Ethan's relationship with her, even after he'd married her a month after Mom's death. I was stunned. I had no idea what she was going to say. She accused me of pretending to be a happy family, of playing the role of dutiful daughter, because I wanted all the property Mom had left to be inherited by Ethan, and thus eventually by me. According to her twisted logic, I was being nice to Ethan, despite my true feelings, so he would leave everything to me and nothing to Bethany and her kids. I realized then that Ethan had probably lied to her, told her that Mom had left the properties to him, not to me. I don't know why he'd lied. Maybe to spare her feelings, to avoid making her feel like Mom had deliberately excluded him. But whatever the reason, it was fueling her rage. As soon as she accused me, I burst out laughing. It was a hysterical, almost manic laugh, the kind that bubbles up when you're teetering on the edge of sanity. Bethany's face drained of color. At first, she refused to believe me, but when I stopped laughing, she saw the truth in my eyes. She didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of the house. I couldn't stay there, not for another second. Everything was too tense, too toxic. I spent the night at a friend's house, feeling raw and exposed. As expected, Ethan called around midnight. He was furious. He screamed at me, said I had no right to tell Bethany the truth about the will. That really pissed me off. I told him he had no reason to lie to her in the first place. He knew Mom had left him nothing but a small amount of money. The properties he'd been bragging about, the properties Bethany was expecting to benefit from, actually belonged to me. Besides, I reminded him, he'd allowed Bethany to treat me like dirt, knowing full well how she felt about me. He was jealous, I accused, that Mom had left everything to me and nothing to him. Ethan's voice softened, a hint of pleading creeping in. He'd been planning to talk to me later, he said. His business hadn't been doing well for years, and Mom knew that. Yet, despite her wealth, she'd never offered to help him. He called her selfish, said she'd hidden her inheritance out of spite because she didn't like Bethany and didn't want him to be with a woman she disapproved of. Of course, Mom didn't like Bethany, not after seeing how she treated me. It wasn't her fault. And more importantly, they weren't really married. They were legally separated, roommates with a shared child. She didn't owe him anything. She wasn't required to help him financially. And now, her decision to leave everything to me seemed fair. Ethan seemed to care more about Bethany and her family than he did about me, his own daughter. Who's to say he wouldn't have sold all those properties, used the money to fund Bethany's lifestyle, instead of using it to secure my future? It was a valid concern, one I believed Mom had foreseen. I defended her decision. When Ethan accused her of being selfish and lying to him, I pushed back. The only reason he lied to Bethany, he confessed, was because he intended to talk to me, to convince me to share the profits from the properties with him. He was my father, after all. He never thought I'd refuse. But now, he wasn't so sure. I asked him why he'd allowed Bethany to treat me so badly, right in front of him, these past few days. He claimed he'd been too busy, too preoccupied with his own financial worries, to even notice. Bethany had concocted a theory, he said, a twisted explanation for my sudden change in behavior. She believed I was only trying to manipulate him, to secure my inheritance, by acting kind and supportive. He was too worried about the future to care about that, he said. He apologized. It wasn't enough. I told him that if he'd talked to me sooner, if he'd truly confided in me, I might have considered sharing the inheritance. But now, I was convinced Mom had made the right decision by excluding him. His priorities were elsewhere. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe he hadn't noticed Bethany's cruelty. I didn't believe he hadn't heard me all those years, telling him the truth about her. I told him the reason he hadn't said anything to Bethany, even after realizing she was treating me horribly, was because he was afraid of losing her. The only reason he hadn't kicked me out himself was because, deep down, he still felt some flicker of parental obligation, and maybe, just maybe, because it wouldn't be socially acceptable. Now after the will, he needed to keep me close for the money. He was outraged. He told me to come home immediately. I refused. I wasn't going back to that house. I'd decided to move out as soon as possible. I didn't know where I'd live, but anywhere would be better than living with him and Bethany. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. This morning, I woke up to a message from him, sent through a friend's social media account. He was sorry, he said, for making me feel like he'd failed me. He loved me, didn't want to lose me. He asked me to come home so we could talk things out as a family. We'd both said horrible things in anger, he claimed. Things we didn't mean. I'm not so sure I didn't mean them, and I feel like a horrible person for even suggesting it. I think Ethan is probably asking me to come back because he needs the money. That's the cold, hard truth of it. What should I do? Okay, I need to clear some things up. The comments section is blowing up, and I get it, some of my story was vague, maybe even misleading. First, a lot of people are asking why I didn't just move in with relatives after Bethany and her kids moved in. Honestly, I thought the answer was obvious. I wanted to be there for Ethan after losing Mom. I didn't want to lose him, too. Despite the Bethany situation, we always had a good relationship. He was a good father. He was just blind when it came to her. Now, everything's gone to hell. Besides, all my relatives live far away. My grandparents, both sides, live out of state. Moving isn't a simple thing. My life is here. My school, my friends. Just packing up and leaving would be a massive upheaval. Some of you wanted more details about my parents' living arrangement. Look, it was weird, okay? They lived together as a family, but they weren't together as a couple. I get that's unusual, which is probably why none of their relationships lasted long. Until Bethany, of course. Most people my parents dated couldn't wrap their heads around the arrangement. They were essentially living with their ex-partner and their daughter. Mom stopped dating after a while. Ethan had Bethany. She didn't seem to have any problems with the arrangement. Whenever she came over, Mom would just lock herself in her room, and Ethan would be in his. Their rooms were at opposite ends of the house, so it wasn't an issue. They managed to avoid each other pretty easily. A few people asked if Mom had lingering feelings for Ethan, even after their separation. I honestly couldn't say. She hid it well, if she did. In my eyes, they were just friends, co-parents. After I turned 13 and accepted they'd never get back together, I stopped seeing them as anything other than that. Maybe she still had feelings. Maybe she didn't. It doesn't really matter anymore. I spoke to Mom's lawyer and told him about the fallout with Ethan. He was shocked, appalled. I also talked to my grandparents, both sides. They were furious with Ethan, disgusted by his behavior. They asked if I still wanted to stay with him. The answer was a firm no. They're all flying here to deal with the situation. Until then, I'm staying with my friend Maya. Ethan has been showing up here every day for the past week, begging to see me. I've refused. I don't know what his intentions are anymore. I'm too confused, too hurt to trust him. He keeps contacting me on social media, creating fake accounts after I block him. He says he wants to explain, to apologize. But I know he's still with Bethany. They're living together in our house. Until she's gone, I refuse to believe anything he says. People can call me spoiled, whatever. I don't care. I have to take care of myself. I'm staying here until my grandparents arrive. Then we'll figure out what to do. They all live out of state. Moving away isn't an option right now. I still have school. I don't want to move in with anyone else. I'll probably suggest living on my own, but I doubt they'll agree. I just don't know what's going to happen. I'm crossing my fingers, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. This whole situation is a colossal mess. My grandparents arrived yesterday. All four of them. It was intense. They took me to the hotel where they're staying, a fancy place downtown with a view that probably costs more than my entire wardrobe. Ethan was there too, of course. He still has custody of me, technically. The air in that hotel room was thick enough to cut with a knife, a potent mix of anger, disappointment, and raw, unresolved grief. The conversation started predictably. They wanted to know what happened, the nitty-gritty details of the fight with Bethany, Ethan's behavior, everything. I laid it all out, the whole ugly story, from Bethany's initial resentment to Ethan's blatant greed. Then came the suggestions, the well-meaning but ultimately impractical solutions. My maternal grandparents, Sarah and David, wanted to take me back with them to Florida. A fresh start, Leo, Sarah kept saying, sunshine and a supportive environment. My paternal grandparents, Margaret and George, favored a stricter approach, demanding Ethan apologize and attend family counseling. When I suggested living on my own, renting an apartment, it was instantly rejected. Absolutely not, Leo, Margaret said firmly. You're too young. It's irresponsible. Ethan, predictably, insisted on taking me back home. We can fix this, Leo, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We're family. I made it clear. As long as Bethany was in the picture, I wasn't interested in fixing anything. The only way he could prove he had no hidden motives, that he genuinely wanted to reconcile, was by kicking Bethany and her kids out. If he couldn't do that, we had nothing to discuss. He tried to argue, to negotiate, to guilt-trip me, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to be manipulated. I wasn't going back to that toxic environment. My grandparents had to intervene, shutting down his attempts to wear me down. Leo has made her position clear, Ethan, David said, his voice sharp. You need to respect her feelings. They suggested taking me with them, but I wasn't ready to move. I can't just abandon my life here. And Ethan, stubbornly, wasn't willing to relinquish custody. So we were at an impasse, a stalemate of wills. After a long, tense silence, Margaret asked me if I'd be willing to work things out with Ethan if Bethany wasn't living with him. I repeated what I'd been saying all along. I'd be willing to go back home, to try to rebuild our relationship, as long as Bethany wasn't there. All eyes turned to Ethan. He sat there, head in his hands, looking defeated. The weight of the situation, the realization of what he'd lost, seemed to be crushing him. Finally, after agonizing minutes, he looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I'll make it work, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I admit, I was surprised, shocked even. I didn't expect him to agree. I'm still not sure what to make of it, what it means for the future. Right now, I'm staying at the hotel with my grandparents. Ethan has gone back home to talk to Bethany. I have no idea what to expect. I really hope everything turns out okay, that Ethan doesn't start resenting me even more than he already does. I'm genuinely confused about what to do, how to feel. I'm torn between wanting to believe him, wanting to forgive him, and a deep-seated fear of being hurt again. He told us to give him a couple of days to talk things through with Bethany. He doesn't know what's going to happen either. He's walking into a minefield, a volatile situation with no easy answers. The only thing I can do now is wait, hope for the best, and prepare for the worst. I really don't want to lose my family, but I also refuse to sacrifice my own well-being. It's a terrifying balancing act, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough to pull it off. It's been a week since my last update. A long, agonizing week filled with uncertainty and anxiety. But finally, there's been a breakthrough. I moved back home yesterday. The short version, Ethan and Bethany are getting divorced. When he went home that day after the meeting at the hotel, he tried to explain to Bethany that I wasn't ready to come back while she was still living there. He tried to be diplomatic, to soften the blow. He told her about my feelings, about the way she'd treated me, about the need for space and healing. But things had already been rocky between them. The truth about the inheritance, about Mom's will, had created a rift. Bethany felt deceived, betrayed. She thought Ethan had been hiding things from her, that he wasn't someone she could trust. The revelation had shattered her illusion of a perfect future, a life of financial security built on Mom's legacy. So, when he suggested she leave, even temporarily, she completely lost it. All the pent-up resentment, the anger and frustration, exploded. She accused him of choosing me over her, of prioritizing his daughter's happiness over her own. The fight was apparently epic, a shouting match that shook the foundations of the house. In the end, Bethany decided to file for divorce. She saw Ethan's request as the ultimate betrayal, a sign that he didn't value her, didn't love her enough to stand up to me. Her demands are pretty harsh, from what Ethan has told me. She wants a significant chunk of his assets, alimony, everything she can get her hands on. But luckily, they haven't been married for long, only a few months, and they've kept their finances mostly separate. Legally, she isn't really entitled to much. Ethan apologized to me. He didn't offer some pathetic, half-hearted excuse. He took responsibility for his actions, for his blindness, for allowing Bethany to treat me so badly. He said his reaction after learning about Mom's will had been completely irrational, fueled by fear and insecurity. He admitted he'd been a terrible person, a terrible father. He said he was going to try to be better, to make amends for his mistakes. He promised to prioritize me, to listen to me, to be the father I deserved. I told him I was going to hold him accountable for that promise. If he doesn't follow through, if he slips back into his old patterns, I will leave. I will move out, find a way to support myself, and file for emancipation. A lot of people might not agree with my decision to give Ethan a second chance. Some might say I'm naive, foolish, setting myself up for more disappointment. But I believe I'm doing the right thing for me. Even if I'm wrong, it's my mistake to make. It's my life, my decision. I don't want to live with regrets. I don't want to look back and wonder what could have been. I'm going to give Ethan the opportunity to prove himself. Besides, he seems genuinely remorseful. Seeing Bethany's true colors, experiencing her anger and greed firsthand, has opened his eyes. I don't think he'll ever go back to her, not after what he's been through. In fact, he doesn't even seem to care about the divorce at this point. The only thing he's worried about is whether I'm okay, whether I'm willing to forgive him. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm hopeful that we can rebuild our relationship, create a healthier dynamic, and move forward. But I'm also aware that this could be a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of peace before the storm returns. I'm not sure if he's doing this because of the property. The thought lingers, a persistent shadow in the back of my mind, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to believe that he's capable of change, of redemption. We'll find out. Time will tell. Right now, I'm focused on moving forward, on creating a better future for myself. I'm starting therapy, working through my grief and resentment. I'm reconnecting with my friends, rebuilding my social life, and I'm cautiously optimistic about my relationship with Ethan. For now, I'm hopeful. I'm back! It's been a long time. 3 years, to be precise. I know a lot of you wanted an update on how things were going with my dad, so here it is. He wasn't doing it for the property. That's the first thing I want to say. He genuinely showed remorse for his behavior. It wasn't a calculated act, a manipulation to get his hands on Mom's inheritance. Although his business went through a rough patch, he managed to get it back on track. He worked tirelessly, rebuilding his client base, securing new contracts, and implementing smarter financial strategies. It was a long, arduous process, but he persevered, and he's currently paying for my college education. I protested, told him I didn't need it, that I could take out loans, find scholarships, work part-time. But he insisted. He said that after everything that happened, it was the least he could do for me. He wanted to provide me, with the opportunities he felt he denied me in the past. He hasn't spoken to Bethany since the divorce, nor has he mentioned anything about her. He doesn't need to. He's moved on in his own way. He's focused on the future, on rebuilding his life, and on mending his relationship with me. She only received a minimal settlement from the divorce. It was a messy, contentious process, but the lawyers were able to navigate the legal complexities and protect Ethan's assets. Bethany eventually accepted the terms, realizing she had little leverage to demand more. Since then, we've been working hard to improve our relationship. It hasn't been easy. There have been setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt, but we've persevered. We've communicated openly, listened to each other's perspectives, and made a conscious effort to understand each other. And it has gone really well. We are now in a great place, in a healthy and supportive father-daughter relationship. We talk regularly, share our thoughts and feelings, and offer each other encouragement and support. He's become my confidant, my advisor, my friend. Every time I come home from college, we try to do something fun together. We go hiking, see movies, try new restaurants, or simply spend time catching up. It's become a cherished tradition, a way to strengthen our bond and create lasting memories. I'm really proud of how far we've come. This whole situation could have gone wrong so easily. We could have become estranged, bitter, and resentful. But I'm glad my dad chose to improve, to change, when he was given a second chance. I have no regrets about giving him that second chance. It was a gamble, a leap of faith, but it paid off. I learned a valuable lesson about forgiveness, about redemption, and about the power of family. As for the properties, the person managing the rentals is still doing their job. They're reliable, efficient, and dedicated to maximizing the profits from the properties. All the money from them is deposited into a separate account. The idea is that I'll be able to use that money to settle down once I finish college. Since I don't have much time left, and the account balance will probably be enough to buy a house, it's all working out perfectly. The rental properties bring in quite a bit of money, which is good. I could potentially live the rest of my life without working if I chose to, but I also really like my chosen career, architecture. It's challenging, creative, and fulfilling. I'm passionate about design, about building, about creating spaces that enhance people's lives. So I'm going to work. I'm going to pursue my dreams, while continuing to rent out those houses for extra income. It's a win-win situation. If you're wondering why I don't move into one of them, it's because they're not in the city where I grew up, nor in the city where my university is now. They're scattered across the state, in smaller towns and rural areas. That's why I plan to buy a place when I return to my hometown. I really like it there. It's familiar, comfortable, and filled with people I care about. I want to live there when I graduate, to contribute to the community, and to build a life of my own. So that's where I am, 3 years later. I'm in a good place, surrounded by love and support, and excited about the future. The scars from the past are still there, a reminder of the challenges I've overcome, but they don't define me. They've made me stronger, more resilient, and more appreciative of the good things in my life. And that's the end of my story. For now,